Sanbanan Dumlang, hello, it is Simply Spissa here, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast Simply Do the Work, but also a special welcome to you if you're joining me here for the very first time. If you're not yet subscribed, please do subscribe and follow the podcast, and also feel free to reach out to me at Simply Spissa on Instagram and Twitter. So today's podcast episode, as you can tell by the title, we'll be talking about the issue of conversion therapy and basically like the ex-gay movement. And so I do want to say this is, a rather heavy topic. Like, I think it's quite a serious topic that, I don't say I can do it justice by trying to make it too lighthearted. And so I do want to just, before diving into, just do put like a content warning / trigger warning, because there will be a portion where I do talk about sexual assault. But without further ado, let us start this episode. Firstly, let me talk about like what was the inspiration behind this episode. So a couple days ago, I watched the Netflix documentary Pray Away, and I'm also currently reading the memoir Boy Erased, which is also like a movie was made out of it. And so Boy Erased, I actually watched the movie, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. I'm not sure when it came out, but I did watch it. But like reading the book again kind of like really brought it brought new meaning to the story, because I also like I don't really remember much from the movie, but I also feel like obviously when adaptations are made, things are left out, and it made me really think a lot about like the movie, the Netflix documentary, and the book. Made me think about just my own experiences, and even maybe want to do a bit more research on this topic, which is what I want to share with you guys today. So the first story is from when I was still in high school. I met a friend at church who came out to me as transgender. Now, at that time, I was still trying to figure out myself, but I really appreciated that like this person felt, like this, let me say, this person's coming out was very instrumental and very helpful to me, to my own journey, right? Like we did speak about coming out in the previous episode. And, that was something that we bonded on, because I think even at that time, I don't think I had put a label on my sexuality, but I did say that, I've been having, these, I think I was saying, I can't remember if I said like gay thoughts or gay attractions. I'm not sure exactly what I said to them. And so, we both, like, we had that, like, we had that, like, commonality, I guess, like, we were able to relate to each other on our queerness, even though, we were on, like, different parts of the spectrum. But then, I think a year or two after I met this person, they suddenly disappeared. Like, they literally disappeared. And I actually remember that before they disappeared, what happened was that I think they came out to their parents, and the parents did not take it well. I also remember because I actually remember, like, just before they disappeared, what happened was, I remember they were sending like some text asking if they could stay over at my place. But now at that time, I was getting ready to leave for a school camp, and my dad wasn't at home, and it's just like my parents have this thing about like sleepovers. My parents are not about sleepovers, and I kind of felt like it like with just my mom. I felt like my dad's not here. Like I can't really say anything. Plus, I'll be leaving, so I don't know how that would work. And I remember because when I went to the camp, it was like literally it was in the woods. So when I was there, I didn't have any cell service. There was like no place to charge my phone, so I didn't use my phone. It was like I kept it off so that I can be able to use my phone on the way back, right, from the camp. And it's like when I came back, that person was gone. Like they like in a way like disappeared. And I think I did put 2 and 2. I did have like assumptions about what happened, but I didn't really know, right? And so I think it was after, I think a couple weeks or months went by, and then I was like, no man, let me actually find out what happened. So I think I asked my mom what happened, because my mom was actually like kind of like my mom would talk to that person's parents, and my mom was like, oh no, that person is at a rehab facility. And in my mind, like the red bells or the alarms went off. I'm like, oh no, I don't know, like I don't like pry further and ask my mom like what rehab, what do you know? Because in my mind, like, okay, this is probably, they probably sent them to a conversion center. And then I think it was, yeah, like 2 or 3 years where I didn't see this person. And then I did see them like one day because, right, I ended up going to university. Like literally, it's like in like my final year of high school, I believe it was. But their parents were still showing up at church, But like I wasn't close to the parents to be asking them for constant updates and stuff like that. But I remember like one day when I was coming home, I was home for the weekend, or I think it was a long weekend. So I came home and I went to church with my family, and then I saw this person, and I almost couldn't believe it. And I remember just speaking to them and also just finding out. I remember they did tell me that the other place they went to was sort of like a conversion therapy type of place. They would tell me how they were made to do hard labor as like punishment. They'll tell me how they had to cut their hair, and it's just that takes me on. I also another experience that happened when I was still in high school is I remember because at that time, right, I wasn't really dating IRL. In real life, I was more like all the people who I dated. It was either those like online relationships where we'd just be chatting and like nothing came out of it. There was only one person who I actually met IRL. Like let's talk about dating. We're not talking about other things. That's neither here nor. But I remember there was this person who I was dating. Right, we were talking. We were like in like, this online virtual relationship, and I remember out of nowhere, they start quoting the book of Romans, talking about how what we're doing is wrong and we're living in sin, and like God is sort of just giving us over to our sin. And that is very traumatizing. If you're like still like 16, 17, still trying to figure out yourself, and someone who you thought, was in this with you says that type of thing. Like that is trauma. That is truly trauma. I was traumatized. But then fast forward to 2019, the infamous 2019, and there was this person who I actually met this person, I guess 2018. Yeah, 2018, we followed each other on Instagram, and that was when I was a lot more active on Instagram. I used to like play the game of Instagram once in a while. Now my Instagram is that's not the point. But yeah, I remember this person, like we followed each other on Instagram. I think they DM'd me, like he DM'd me first, and we started having conversations and just talking about, oh, like I remember we had conversations about just like our sexuality, and I think like he briefly mentioned that he had some issues with that, and I was like, and I also mentioned that, and we were just like I think also noted we had like some like common factors, like we were both studying in like medical orientated degrees. So that's something else we bonded about because he was telling me like how he actually wanted to do medicine, but he couldn't get into that, so he's studying like a clinical associate degree, if I'm not mistaken. And then was even saying that, he might consider like applying to like my university. And, we were just like talking. And then I remember eventually we made plans to meet up and like have a date and stuff. And things didn't work out for various reasons. Like I remember I felt like they were just putting too much pressure on me. Like things were just moving way too fast for me. And so I was just like, yeah, no, I can't do this. But honestly, like that person, there are some funny moments from that story, but I will not get into for today's sake. But what was quite interesting about this person is that I don't know if it was a couple months later or what, but like one of my friends like asked me, so when last did you talk to this person? Let's call him Jacob. Like that's not his real name. When last did you talk to Jacob? I'm like, oh no, I haven't spoken to Jacob since like we tried dating because I remember like I blocked him on like WhatsApp, and I unfollowed him on Instagram because it was messy. Okay, it wasn't just a mutual, okay, let's let things go. And my friend told me, yeah, Jacob. Then my friend like showed me an Instagram post that Jacob made where he was like basically denouncing homosexuality and saying that he's given his life over to Jesus and he no longer wants to be living in sin. And this person got immense backlash, immense, because I think what I did mention is like they were like a micro influence on Instagram. You can say like I remember at some point they had like 11,000 followers on Instagram, and a lot of his following was from like the queer community. And so obviously when he made this statement, this proclamation, it came with a lot of backlash. I remember like I think eventually he deleted the post and then his account went private because like I wasn't following him anymore, and that really like saddened me. And to us, I think that encounter also triggered me, triggered me back to that encounter I had in high school with that person who I was talking to online, who, suddenly, turned on me and said, nope, you can't continue living in sin like this, And this is within 2019, if you've been listening to the podcast consistently, you see a lot was happening in that year. And this, I guess, ties into like the themes of like, I guess in me, right, it really did instill a lot of shame, right, with regards to my sexuality. Like I've spoken in previous episodes about how, like, the religious aspect has really caused a lot of inner turmoil, right? And I think with regards to that, I do want to recommend a book which I've listened to, like the audiobook. I've listened to it twice. The Velvet Rage. I didn't write down the author's name. I'll put the book's name in the description. But the Velvet Rage talks about how, like, dealing with, I think the full title is the Velvet Range, dealing with the shame, growing up gay in a straight man's world, something like that. So specifically, that book talks about cis gay men's experiences, but it definitely was a resource that helped me, like in 2019, because that's when I listened to the audiobook, and then recently again, right, I decided to give it a visit, and it really also helped me, like with regards to like the relationship traumas, which is a topic we've discussed also on this podcast. Like that book has really helped me to unpack that a bit, but I'm deviating a bit. So like all this to say is conversion therapy is something that is real and it's prevalent and it's pervasive, right? I even did some research on how is the situation looking in South Africa, because the movie Pray Away or the documentary Pray Away and the book Boy Erased are both set in America. And, even though there are parallels, I think, it's very important for me, especially, to stay loyal to the South African story where I come from and understand how, while we might have similar issues, they manifest differently here in South Africa. So one of the resources that really helped, it's a report on current practices in conversion therapy, immersion technology, and the protection of LGBTQ plus rights in Africa. So this report was prepared by the Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity and Expression and Sexual Characteristics SOGSC unit of the Center for Human Rights of the Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria. That is a mouthful, but yeah, that is like that is where a lot of the content or the research content is coming from. So I think before we continue further, let us just define conversion therapy. So according to this report, conversion therapy is a broad term which refers to therapy techniques or other activities that attempt to change or alter sexual orientation or reduce a person's attraction to other persons of the same sex and instill conventional gender roles. Conversion therapy is based on the premise that homosexuality is a disease, addiction, or religious aberration, even though all major medical and psychiatric organizations agree that LGBTQ plus identities are a normal aspect of human diversity. Conversion therapy may also be pursued by family members or individuals who are concerned that being LGBTQ plus will make an individual's life more difficult within society. I find that last part in this definition to be quite compelling, because I know I have considered trying to change my sexuality and my gender identity because of the fact I thought that, oh my gosh, like, this is gonna make my life a lot harder, right? And I even know, like, when I came out to my parents, that was a real valid concern of theirs, right? I think, obviously, like I did mention in the previous episode that, there were some things said which were like upsetting to me, but if I look at it from their perspective, I think also they are aware of like the violence and even, I guess, the discrimination that LGBTQ plus people face, and as their child, they don't want me to suffer any of that, right? But moving along to the forms of conversion therapy as described by this report. So there's I think 4 or 5 main forms that discuss. First, there's the psychoanalytic form, which is basically when people who are trained in psychology or psychiatry attempt to change people's sexuality, even though this practice, it's today we now recognize it is pseudo psychology, it's pseudoscience, it's not real. But what I found quite interesting is that it was only in 1990 when the World Health Organization removed homosexuality from like considered, like could no longer considered to be an illness, which I feel like 1990 is like so recent. Like that's like literally like a decade before I was born. Like that is very recent. Even though I think the DSM-5 it was removed, or not DSM, but like basically like the diagnostic, the psychiatric diagnostic thing, right? DSM. I don't know which edition because DSM-5 is the latest edition. I think it was in 1978 when they removed homosexuality as an illness, as a mental illness. I think also it's worth mentioning that, I think a lot of us, when we think of conversion therapy, we think of it in like the religious context, but there are many like non-religious people who do believe that it's an illness, or who do seek this practice. Which we got to the second form of conversion therapy is the faith-based, which I think is one you're most familiar with. It's like the churches, and also in South Africa, there's also or even in Africa, there's the traditional aspect of it, right? Where people who aren't, I mean, could be Christian or not Christian, go to traditional healers, and sometimes they're given different concoctions or herbal medications to drink, or different traditional aspects. I know even in South Africa, the Xhosa tribe, they have an initiation, right? It's a rite of passage for boys, right? And some people, if your parents suspect that you are queer in any way, they might force you to go to that initiation school so that you can hopefully come back being cis het, right? That is something which I never really thought of, because obviously me being Zulu, that is not part of my tradition, that's not part of my culture. And then the third type of conversion therapy is aversive, which, if I could just explain aversive in my own way, it's basically like, okay, let me put an example. I think that's the best way to make it make sense. So, for example, they would make the person watch like maybe like something gay, and then give them an electroshock, or like beat them physically, so to sort of try to condition them, which I think falls back into like pseudo psychology. Like, if you know about conditioning, like different ways of conditioning, like think about also like Pavlov and operant conditioning, classical conditioning, those things, right? So it's kind of like, if you pair these gay things with negative reactions, then the person will be put off from doing it, but that just causes trauma. And then the fifth form is sexual abuse, and this manifests in the horrific act of corrective rape. And this primarily, it mostly affects LGBT women, right? It mostly, there is a famous South African footballer, a female lesbian South African footballer, who was brutally murdered, right? I've seen, this year in South Africa, there's been a huge spike in the hate crimes against the LGBTQ plus community. And, some people are putting on this violence in the name of trying to help these people, or in the name of thinking that this will cure them, or even like deter others, right? It's also, I think, also it's a way of making an example out of people to make the rest of the community be afraid to be themselves. And the final form is surgical. Now, this is more of an ancient practice, not really done today, but they used to operate on people's brains and their genitalia, thinking that would cure them, using cure in air quotes. And so, infamously, during the apartheid time here in South Africa, psychologists provided the South African government with pseudo-scientific justification for forced conversion therapy. I think I remember in the episode where I talked about the problem with pride, I mentioned how, the pride movement, right, LGBTQ plus rights, was an integral part of anti-apartheid activism and work, because before then it wasn't really like legislation, but then when the apartheid government came, they made all these laws that were criminalizing LGBTQ plus people, and even like allowing forced conversion therapy on them. And so another thing I found compelling in this report they mentioned is that, now we have the issue of these therapies moving online and becoming more accessible and more dangerous. Like people who, perhaps, in your area there isn't a conversion therapy center, or there isn't anyone who's practicing the act. Now people can go online. There are people who are making videos, YouTube, sermons, right? They've so many ways online where people can access this, and it's really scary. It's honestly scary, because there seems to not be really anyone who's checking for this, anyone who's really holding these people accountable. Like, I found on research that they say that currently 71 countries still criminalize homosexuality around the globe. I read in another article, and like, I didn't fact check this, right? But apparently South Africa was the first country in the world to decriminalize. I think, I mean, let's say one of the first, because I don't want to lie. But I know South Africa definitely is the only country in Africa where we have like marriage equality rights. But even those are so, like, I remember I hosted a webinar a couple months back, and the guest they talked about how, there were laws in South Africa where, like, if you went to Home Affairs and said you want to get married, the person could say no based on their own personal or religious beliefs. But like, now work is being done to undo those laws, because even though South Africa, we do have like, our constitution is deemed one of the most progressive, most inclusive, right? Because a constitution does have provisions for different sexual identities and different genders, but the implementation of it isn't, fully there. And even just like the certain laws, like I read that the Children's Act, for example, there isn't a section of the Children's Act that specifically prohibits the forced conversion therapy of children, of minors. And so that is something which is currently in the process. I think it was in May or July. I can't remember because I didn't write that. I don't think I wrote that down in my notes. But in May or July, that's when proposals will be made to add these things to the Children's Act to further, protect LGBTQ plus minors. Because also, I think another issue that we had, like particularly in South Africa, is that all these legislations were made, but nothing was done to address the societal issues, to address also like people's ideas and thoughts. Because I think a lot of people, yes, first of all, there are people who are just homophobic because they want to, right? Because they choose to, because that is like they're dead set on that. But also there are many other people who are like, who think that way because they don't understand, because they fear what they don't know. And I think that nothing was really done to ensure that on a societal and even on like because obviously I feel like you can't really say on like an individual level. I think obviously, yes, individuals, it's important to work on individual, but I think just like in a community way, right, to ensure that communities are more accepting, are more I don't want to say tolerant. I can't find the right word, but you guys get what I'm trying to say. And so the trend of conversion therapy is a global issue, right? But according to this report, the highest prevalence has been registered in countries like the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, China, and South Korea. And currently, it is manifesting in the African continent in countries like South Africa, as I mentioned, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, and Zambia. And so the legal frameworks on conversion therapies, I think, like the last section that I want to talk about. And so, like, according to the 2019 report by Outright, 172 countries have no legislation or measures to ban conversion therapy. 10 states, including South Africa, the United States, Canada, Norway, Uruguay, Netherlands, Spain, Switzerland, Argentina, and Cyprus have policies that partially ban conversion therapy. As I mentioned, the Children's Act still needs to be fixed. They still need to add those provisions to protect minors, right? Because at present, there are only 5 countries in the world that have a ban on conversion therapy, namely Brazil, Ecuador, Malta, Taiwan, and Germany. And I just want to read you like the section they wrote on Malta, because I feel like Malta has like the most progressive legislation in this case. It says Malta's national ban of conversion therapy is the most comprehensive in the world. The ban on conversion therapy was succeeded by a law which was adopted in 2015 and dealt with the affirmation of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And so I feel like the problem that we have now, as I've mentioned, is, there are limits to how they can enforce these laws, right? 24 countries in the world have a ban, partial laws, or are moving towards the prohibition of conversion therapy. However, and this is like, the limitations of conversion therapy according to this report, These laws tend to prohibit only the medical form of conversion therapy. Other forms like religious and traditional conversion therapy are not described as unlawful, yet they are the most common forms that manifest in this era. I think there are many LGBTQ plus people who can talk about experiences in the church or being taken to a traditional, healer. And it's kind of like, I get this thing of separation of church and state. But, these churches can't be left unchecked, because what they're doing is causing harm, right? Like there are many reports and studies that have shown, like the Prayer Away documentary, right? Because I think the primary intention was to show how harmful this practice is. And I think that we need to be a lot more aware of this issue because it is quite prevalent. As I've even that's why I started also sharing some of my own experiences because I do think conversion, like the issue of conversion therapy, isn't just like the formal settings of it. Like it happens in like a formal social setting. I think even just like the day-to-day interactions that LGBTQ plus people have that either victimize them or make them feel like, oh, maybe I should change. Because I think, and this is where I think it gets a little messy for me, right? When I think about Jacob's story, right? Now he says that he's no longer gay, right? That is, and it's kind of like, you know on one end, I don't want to be the person who says, hey, listen, you are gay. Like I don't want to like force it onto him. But at the same time, it's like on one hand, right, I do want to respect people's autonomy. The fact that like you as an individual can do whatever you want, but also I have to question and critique like what are you promoting, right? If you stand up and say that you're no longer homosexual, you're no longer gay, you are no longer living in sin. What are you saying to other gay people? Are you saying that they're living in sin? Are you saying that they're wrong? It's kind of this is the way. And then also in the report, or was it in this report, or was it in other journal articles I read? I'm not sure, but there was also this discussion of what do we do if someone like is like a grown adult and they want to do this? I think obviously when it comes to children, definitely children need to be protected, right? Children should not be forced or subjected into this because even with the Prayer Away documentary, like a lot of the people will talk about how they got into this at a very young age. But also, I also wonder, like, even if you are, say, you are an autonomous grown adult, and you say you are consenting to this practice, what is your motivation for it, right? Where did those ideas come in? Could it be that perhaps because of your childhood and your upbringing and the messaging that you're surrounded by? I think this is why it's not just about having, these anti-discrimination laws, right? I think there's also like children need to be educated on, the beauty and the complexity of humanity, right? Because also I know as soon as they children to be educated, I know the people who saw one clutching their pearls like, oh, you guys can't be teaching children about sex. It's like no one's teaching kids about sex. Obviously it's going to be age appropriate education. And in many ways, I think I recognize that in many ways I'm blessed. First of all, we're born in South Africa, a country where even though like societal, we still have a long way to go. But there is a lot of progress, not only compared to the rest of Africa, but like even compared to the rest of the world, right? South Africa is quite progressive in certain aspects, but like I mentioned, right, societal, it's still, like the lived day-to-day experiences, it's still, a challenge for many people. I think I'm also grateful that I was able to find people who are able, amidst the mess, amidst the conflicting messages, I was able to find people who validated me and said that I'm okay. And and not to get like too spiritual on you guys, but I do also think that because I remember when I was in church, like the church where I grew up in, like the one where I talked about last week with the pastor, just if you listen to the previous episode, I'm talking about the church I grew up in. But even when I, came to university, there were times where I would want to actually talk to the pastor because I still did have that part of me. I was like, but what if I'm wrong about this? What if I'm going to hell? But I think I was sort of guided by spirit to be like, don't talk to these people. Like if you have these questions, there are so many other resources, online, like queertheology.com. I think that was, which I discovered like last year, which I think was like an absolute blessing, right? Absolute blessing in my life, and really did help me to unpack a lot of that religious trauma, because it does a number on you. Like, you know, I mentioned that is, the number one. I think it's not the number one, but I think it's like in South Africa, that's like the top way. Like, I'm pretty sure almost every LGBTQ plus person, especially those who grew up Christian, because I can't really speak for other religions, because I don't really understand. I'm not, too familiar with how things work there. But I know that this isn't unique to Christians, right? But no, within Christians, right, a lot of us, we've had those phases where we prayed God to take this away from us, right? I remember I've stood up at altar calls, right, when they were talking about sexual immorality. I remember standing up at altar calls and being like, "Oh Lord, please forgive me, wash me clean." I remember just thinking to myself, like, "Oh my God," because also I'm no longer a virgin. Right? Like, it's like it's been a lot. It's been a lot of trauma and unpacking. And my intention with speaking to you guys about this is just that I think a lot of us, we don't really think about this on a daily, because it's not something that is like in our faces, right? Or also it's not something that we've experienced firsthand. And so, like I mentioned, we need to become aware of it, because it is quite prevalent and extremely harmful. And like the final thought I want to leave with you guys is that as long as homophobia exists, then this issue of conversion therapy and ex-gay movements will continue, because even like in the documentary Pray Away, right, they were primarily focused on the organization Exodus, right? And even though Exodus, like the leaders of it, they realized that they were wrong and they closed their doors, there are many other people who have continued the work of Exodus, right? And that's why also it's not just the job, or like our work is not just to talking to individuals, or work on an individual level. Like we need to integrate society. As a society, we need to come together and realize how harmful this is, and protect the people, and even the people who, have been through this practice, because there are some, right? There are many who are, they're able to make a recovery and they're able to get their lives back. But unfortunately, there are many who take their lives because, they find that they can't change, and just, I'm getting emotional, just, like my heart just really breaks. It really breaks when I think of like, the three people who I mentioned, right? I hope they're doing okay wherever they are. And I hope you listening to this, I hope you are okay. Like if you've had an experience like this, I'm so sorry that you had to go through something like that. But I really pray that, you're able to pick yourself up, love yourself, know that you're valid and you're loved. Like you're loved by me. I love you. And on that note, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to reach out to me at Simply Svisser. Let me know your thoughts and what came up for you. And so until you hear from me in the next one, I love you guys so much. Bye, guys.